Joining me to discuss this now live in the studio is Conservative MP Michael Fabricant and the journalist Charlie Peters. Welcome to the programme. First of all, today the Joint Expeditionary Force meeting in London, a coalition formed only around a decade ago, mainly led by the United Kingdom, the Baltic countries, some of the Nordic countries. Michael, what are they discussing?
Well, they're going to discuss precisely what will have to be done if, to use the Prime Minister's words, and Sajid Javid has mentioned it too, a single toe cap goes into NATO territory. You've got to bear in mind that although there are large numbers of American troops in Europe, it is primarily the United Kingdom which is the vanguard, along with some of the eastern countries who will be there, the Baltic countries, to protect their own territory.
And Charlie, from a more of a military perspective, how aligned are these countries? I think there are almost a dozen of them in the alliance.
Well, there's a high level of interoperability. These countries train and work together constantly and indeed have recently served on operations. But I think the broader military concern will be that the operations they've served on have been in sandy, dusky environments far away from the fields of Europe. And while there are training operations and continuous deployments in the Baltics, in Estonia specifically, there is a concern now, I think a very severe one, that the kind of combat that they're facing is not something they're necessarily prepared for.
And you're saying that they may well be facing combat. Is there a genuine risk here? Is there a genuine consideration that Putin might take his ambitions beyond Ukraine?
I don't think anyone can possibly predict the ambitions of Vladimir Putin right now. Many people were even, I think quite foolishly, disregarding the possibility of Ukraine being invaded. And I think it would be unwise to be certain that he's not going to push further once, I believe he will achieve some degree of occupation of this country. So, yeah, I think a level of high readiness that the Secretary-General has mentioned is absolutely justified.
And moving beyond to the United Kingdom's current response, we've heard a tranche of new sanctions announced today by the Foreign Office. Hundreds more entities and individuals, oligarchs, billions of pounds.
Nearly 1,000 in total, with assets of over 100 billion. Now, that's not to say that we're seizing 100 billion, but it seems to me that when the war is over in Ukraine and hopefully Russia is defeated, we should be using some of that money as reparations for Ukraine. Already the mayor of Kyiv has said that the cost of repairing Kyiv is in the order of 10 billion. It's going to be possibly, 100 billion by the time all this is over.
Charlie, do you think that military victory for Ukraine is possible? We've seen a lot of support and a lot of sanction support, but of course some people have been saying, particularly not least the Ukrainian president himself, Zelensky, saying that sanctions aren't going to win this war for Ukraine.
Yeah, and he's absolutely right. I mean, I think the forecasts for a Ukrainian military victory are rising, but they're still fairly low. I think my own personal perspective is that the outcome of this conflict will be fought by civilians in resistance once the military sadly falls to the rather overwhelming might of the Russian military. Every man and his daughter and his son will have perhaps anti-tank missiles hidden under their floor beds. And I think that the Russian forces are going to face a bitter resistance on a scale that they cannot comprehend, and the loss of blood and treasure over many months of attritional suffering at the hands of brave Ukrainians will eventually push them back.
And I was going to say, that's spot on, but also Putin is going to face civilian resistance in Russia itself. At the moment, the polling has shown that 40% of Russians are against the war, 60% are for it. But despite all attempts to stop communication into Russia by blocking off Facebook, by blocking off Twitter, I know lots of people, I've been in contact with them today, who live in Moscow using virtual private networks, are able to access the data. I know of one amazing story where a boy phoned home. I say a boy, a soldier, a conscript. Don't forget, these guys are on just $25 a month. Telling his mother, I thought this was going to be like a school trip. I thought we were going to be welcomed.
This is a Russian soldier.
This is a Russian soldier in Ukraine telling his mother that, we're being murdered here, and I was being given the impression this was going to be like a school trip. We'd all be welcomed. It would be a picnic. And, of course, that's not happening. So you're getting the mothers of these soldiers getting information from these soldiers who are not supposed to have cell phones, but they do.
And not everyone has a virtual private network. You have to be pretty young, pretty interested in terms of getting onto that sort of Western side. But people watching the main television channel last night in Russia, Channel 1, I think it was.
Yeah, it was, which is the main bulletin.
The most watched bulletin. We can show a clip of that now, of this brave journalist, a producer at the network, standing up behind there, holding up a sign saying, "No war." Charlie, what do you make of that?
Well, it's extraordinary and brilliant to see. But to what extent do we know the people in Russia, how are they receiving this message? You know, it's very unclear for us to know to what extent Putin has support from his own people. I mean, there are so many commentators and foreign policy analysts telling us that Putin is overwhelmed with opposition in the country and there are thousands of arrests, etc. But I mean, I'm not sure I buy this entirely. I think a significant portion of the Russian population, while they are enduring propaganda, do support this incursion. And we have to not lose sight of that and remember that actually he does have quite a lot of support.
I wonder, at what point do sanctions whittle down that support? You're always playing such a tight game when it comes to sanctions. Arguably, the sanctions that were imposed in 2014, light comparatively as they were, may well have rallied the Russian people to the cause of Putin, sort of saw it as Russia against the world. Do you think, Michael Fabricant, it could be different this time?
Well, it's certainly Putin's narrative at the moment. He's saying, and commentators are saying in Russia, that this is actually the West trying to defend a fascist regime in the Ukraine, and this is Russia's fight, and we've got to make sacrifices. But you've got to bear in mind that the oligarchs who support Putin are really hurting. And eventually, it won't just be the loss of McDonald's. I remember queuing up in the 1980s in Pushkin Square in the old Soviet Union for a McDonald's. And they've been there. It was the only way I could get any decent meat. And that was through a McDonald's.
When did the first McDonald's open?
I think it was about 1988, 89. It was something like that. It couldn't be a United States McDonald's. In fact, they had a big maple leaves everywhere to show it was actually a Canadian franchise, to demonstrate that it wasn't the great Satan, the United States, coming into Pushkin Square in the middle.
Ever since 1988, 89, there's been McDonald's
and many
Russia
more branches.
And in the USSR.
Something like 350.
And now, for the first time in over 30 years, that's gone away. That's quite a moment.
And not just that, but also luxury items. So many shops have been closing for sale. You know, people are beginning to see what's going on. Now, as I said earlier, it's partly being presented that it's the West being evil and rotten and trying to stop Putin's liberation. But as I said, I want to keep repeating myself, but 40% now of Russians, apparently, according to this survey, are saying, you know, this war is wrong. And it will grow. Don't forget, only a week ago, on one of the most popular programs, again on Channel 1, the main television channel, you had normally loyal people on this discussion program, have to be loyal, otherwise they wouldn't be allowed on, with two of them saying this is going to be another Afghanistan. Another one saying this is...
You must be incredibly brave, Charlie Peters, to say something like that. How many, if it is 40%, it must be very hard to poll the Russian people at this moment. But if it is 40%, how many of that 40% would actually put their head above the parapet and voice their concern?
Absolutely, and I think the display we saw last night on Channel 1 News will, I think, inspire more people to take that stand and risk arrest in public. It only takes one person, I think, to do an extraordinary act of free speech, of expression against a dictatorial leader, that inspire masses to do the same. But really, I don't think, just coming on your past discussion about sanctions, I think this war is going to be won by the number of body bags returning to Russia, or news of deaths. It will not be won, I think, by crippling economic situations behind Russian borders. If there is any country in Europe that has had experience over the last 50 years of looking after its own as the world isolates it, it's probably Russia, right? And so they will endure that and withdraw from Western support. But there's only so much that can be done when thousands and tens of thousands of Russian men are being killed over the line.
That's right. And of course, they've even had to bring in now mobile crematoria because they remember exactly what happened with Afghanistan with the body bags. But at the end of the day...
Body bags and missing bodies, it's one and the same, isn't it?
That's
I'm afraid we've got to run to a break now. But Charlie, Michael, thank you for that discussion.